Hello, it's Pete back again with another review. It's been a while since I've done a film review, but today I'm finally getting around to reviewing one of the most anticipated films of the year for me, which is the Steven Spielberg directed version of Roald Dahl's The BFG. So I'm going to jump straight on into this. I have to say right off the bat that I'm a huge fan of Roald Dahl's books. Love them growing up as a kid, and one of my favourites my mum used to read to me was the BFG. I really, really love that book, and for me, BFG was one of my very favourites of all of his books. I know a lot of people love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James of the Giant Peach, and those are very well known in terms of film properties. But for me, BFG and Matilda were my two favourites, and of course, Matilda's been turned into a film very well. But I loved it when I first heard and first saw the teaser trailer way back when, I think it was January time, that we were getting a Spielberg directed version of the BFG, because to technologies at a stage nowadays where you can do that story real justice and make it really, really good, and Spielberg usually always delivers a decent film. He doesn't often make a terrible film. Sometimes films are okay, sometimes they're better. So without further ado, I'm going to go into it, but just to say my expectation of this film was pretty high. Like I say, I really, really loved that book as a kid. I thought Spielberg was a good pick for it. I liked what I saw from the trailers and everything else. So I'm going to jump straight into it. So BFG, it is good. It is a good film. I don't feel that we'll be talking about the BFG in the same as we talk about the classics that Spielberg's done. It's not on the level of Jurassic Park for me. It's not on the level of E.T. But similarly to how Bridge of Spies came out last year, also wasn't like up there with Schindler's List or Saving Private Ryan, but that doesn't mean it wasn't good. And I think really Bridge of Spies and the BFG for me are on a similar footing in terms of the fact that they're both decent, well done movies, and they're a good Spielberg movie, but they're not fantastic. They're not going to be remembered as one of his classics because there's just a few things that hold them back from being amazing. So I did really like it. What did I like most about it? I think obviously the cinematography, it did look beautiful, like I saw in the trailers. I think he was the right pick from it visually, and also because Spielberg is known for being able to inject a bit of darkness into some of his movies, and the BFG does have a bit of a dark streak to it. In fact, all of Roald Dahl's children's books do tend to have a bit of a dark sense of humour that I think J.K. Rowling sort of managed to replicate quite well with Harry Potter a lot later. There is a lot of similarities I see in J.K. Rowling and Roald Dahl. There's some bits of crossover, and again, the score was fantastic. John Williams' score for this was really, really good. You're always aware of it in the movie, but never so aware it overpowered what was going on. So I really liked his score, and again, it was reminiscent of Harry Potter, sort of building that kind of weird connection in my mind between the two things. But yeah, the things that I really liked about it was obviously visually, I said it was great. But I suppose that's a given for a Spielberg movie. He's always going to do something good with the camera. But he really does, at least in the first part of the movie, bring you into the world very, very well. But the real thing that was really good was the BFG himself, who was played by Mark Rylance, who was incidentally also the best thing about Bridge of Spies last year, and he's definitely the best thing about this film, which is obviously good because he is a title character, the BFG. He was a spot-on portrayal of what I wanted the BFG to be. And visually he looked fantastic. I love the opening. The opening was very, very good. The CG in general on him was excellent. There was a couple of slips in the movie where it didn't look quite right, but mainly on him it looks really, really good. I thought they nailed the look. I thought he nailed the tone of the character brilliantly. And it was literally like I was seeing, one of my childhood heroes, if you like, be brought to life before my eyes. So I really thought they nailed that perfectly. And of course, that's the number one thing you wanted to get right. There was an animated version of BFG quite a few years ago, 1989 one that Cosgrove Hall did, and while I did enjoy that, I felt that something about the style of the animation didn't really lend itself to BFG, because BFG always feels to me quite a little bit not dark exactly, but there's a slight dark tone to it, and I think the style of that animation was just a bit too, it was cel shading, it was a bit too bright, it was a bit too clean. Like, I feel there's a bit of a darker edge to this stuff, and I think that they got it right with this, his portrayal. Like, he did look a bit funny looking, he did look a bit odd, and that's really what he needs to look like. He shouldn't be looking like too cute. I thought he looks a bit cute in the old Cosgrove Hall one, so I know it's beloved by a lot of people, that a lot of people really swear by that old Cosgrove Hall one and grew up with it, and so I know people do like it, and I do enjoy it. As an animated film, it's pretty decent, but I do think there were some things it got wrong. the look of the Giants and the look of the BFG for me just didn't really fit what I thought they should look like. And here I think they got it much more spot on. I didn't like the look of the Giants when I saw them in the trailers, but I think in the actual movie they improved them a lot. Because in the trailers they all seemed like they looked kind of similar and didn't really have their own characters, whereas in the actual final movie they did seem to all have their own distinctive characters and looks to them. We could have got a few more shots of them in the movie. They were sort of in the background a little bit. You didn't see enough of them, I suppose. But my other great big positive of this is the little girl, of course, was really, really good, and her chemistry with the BFG was really good, because that's the central thing the film hangs its hat on, is the connection between these two characters, and that's where you do feel a bit of a connection between E.T. and the influence from E.T. coming through, because it is, a worldly character and another worldly character coming together, forming a friendship, and that is the basis on which the movie rests, and those parts work really, really, really well. The other thing I loved about it is just how closely it stuck to the book. But this was also came into being a bit of a negative, because it really was the book beat for beat, as far as I remember it. It included all the scenes, including the scene where the bigger giants, are sort of throwing the BFG around and beating him up a bit, and you realise that even though BFG is a giant, these other giants are much bigger than him. He's kind of a runt of the litter, so to speak. So, again, another scene that was omitted from Cosgrove Hall one, they included that here, and it was really, really good. And by and large, it was a faithful adaptation the book. So for me, as a fan of the book, I thought it was spot on. I thought they couldn't have adapted it any better. Having said that, there is a case for a completely faithful adaptation sometimes, meaning it doesn't quite connect with a newer audience. And I think that is because there has been some negative reviews to this, and I think that is what's happening here. I remember watching the movie, and while I was really impressed with how close it was sticking to the book, it did bring to mind the fact that in the book, really, a lot of what's going on is kind of all in one location. There's an awful lot that's just in the BFG's house, and while that is replicated exactly like it is in the book, I feel that for a movie it was a bit too slow. I think that anyone who's just watching it as a film and doesn't know what the book was like will probably find that it's too slow at times, this movie, especially for little kids. The humour was spot on for what the book is, and again, the humour in the book is very much aimed at kids. This isn't a film that is aimed at, it doesn't work on multiple levels like Zootropolis. The book is very much aimed at children, the film is just the same. But if you like the book when you were a kid, and you remember it fondly like I do, you probably will enjoy it. But what I'm trying to get at is that for a new audience who aren't necessarily au fait with this, and I think also nowadays we're used to children's movies, or especially in the wake of Harry Potter and things like that, where the world is a little bit more explained and things are a little bit more gone into. Like nowadays, you don't really get a lot of that. But when the BFG was written, there's a lot of things that you just sort of have to take on face value that don't really get any explanation. You never find out where the BFG comes from. You never find out where the other giants came from, why they hate him, or why he gets picked on. You never find out where Giant Country is or how they get there or anything like that. It is all very much left to the imagination. And so that is something that was, again, it's just like in the book, but there may be certain things that for a new audience it just doesn't click. They may be just thinking, why isn't this explained? Why isn't there more of a justification for this? There is a bit where the little girl Sophie, she asks him, what were your parents called? And he says, giants don't have any parents. That's the only explanation you get. And again, that's probably the same as in the book. But for a modern audience, it may seem a little bit like there's not enough explaining going on in terms of how the world works, how he got there, where these other giants came from, and all these other things. And again, like I say, I think the movie does have a pacing issue, in as much as it follows the pace of the book so to the letter, that I think it's a bit slow and a bit boring in places for, again, people not used to this style of filmmaking and more used to the kind of modern style, like a Secret Life of Pets type feel, where there's a lot of action going on, there's a lot of fast moving stuff happening, as well as like funny things happening. And I think that for very young kids it's going to be too slow, and maybe even for some adults it will also prove to be a bit too slow. So there were some stumbles with the pacing. And the other big negative is in the last third it did seem to drag out a little bit. Like there's a couple of third act stumbles where I felt that while all the stuff when it focused on the BFG and Sophie was really, really good and really strong, and that was the heart of the movie, some of the other actors in it that come in towards the last third of the movie, I didn't really like their performances. They were very sort of, you sometimes do get this a little bit in family-friendly movies where adult actors give a really hammy over-the-top performance because they're acting in a kids' film, and they have to be over the top like this because it's a kids' film, and it's like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to really overact. You got a little bit of that again with some of the Harry Potter movies, but not that much, and they got more subtle as they went along as well. This was very much like some of the acting, some of the auxiliary characters, without giving away any plot spoilers, were just a little bit too, like, hammy and cheesy, and it's like it became for me a little bit irksome to watch. Now, as a kid, you probably wouldn't pick up on that. You probably think it was fine, and this is aimed at kids, so it's not a huge complaint. But for me, there was a couple of bits in the third act where the story stopped dead on to kind of do a bit of humour, and it was a bit too over the top, and it was lingered on a bit too long. It was like, I'm sure as a kid you find it funny, but as a person watching it now, I was like, this has just been dragged out a bit too much. But like I say, I'm sure kids in the audience love it, and they find it's quite good. And the other thing is that the climax at the end of the movie that it all leads up to is over and done with very, very, very quickly. There's no real big action climax like you might expect in modern movies, and it does sort of lead you into believing there's going to be something, and a little bit disappointing. It's wrapped up very, very quickly, and I kind of, even me, who's a fan of the book, thought that they would have elaborated on that a bit and expanded it a bit. It is all dealt with and finished off in a very, very quick way, and I think that actually that's a bit of a critique of Roald Dahl's books in general, is he did tend to sort of finish them off very, very quickly, and quite often they rather petered out rather than having a really big dramatic ending. They would just sort of end in an unusual way, and that was it. And while that's a really good ending for a book, actually, for a film, sometimes you want it to sort of have a bit more dramatic impact leading up to the end of it. So it causes you to have to adapt it a little bit more. And I think that really, if there's a criticism of this movie, it's that they did need to actually change it a little bit more, which is normally what I don't advocate it, but change it a little bit more to make it a little bit more cinematic. It felt very, very rigorously like what the book was, despite a couple of minor changes. So overall, I would give the BFG an 8 out of 10. That's quite high for some people. Some people have really slated and really ripped into this movie and hated it. I just have to be honest with what I saw. I really did enjoy it. I thought the connection between the BFG and Sophie was very, very strong. I really, really felt emotional in some of those scenes. It was brilliant seeing the BFG be brought to life in such a vivid way that was exactly like how I imagined it from my childhood. Mark Rylance was amazing. To be honest, he deserved the Oscar for this rather than Bridge of Spies, but you know, the world being the way it is, he's never going to get nominated for BFG, so he got an Oscar. That's the main thing, because he's an excellent actor, and I'm liking more and more what I see from him. It's not one of Spielberg's best. It's not up there with E.T. or anything like that, but it's a decent watch for me, and as someone who's a fan of the book, I enjoyed it. Now, if you weren't familiar with the book, it may be that it is too slow. It may be that it isn't for you. Because as I say, the feedback I've had from people I know who watched it is a lot of them have really not liked it. So I can't recommend it wholeheartedly, but you will definitely go and like it as much as I did. All I can say is that for me, I really enjoyed it. I got what I wanted out of it, even though it didn't exceed my expectations, and in some ways it wasn't as engaging a watch as I kind of thought it would be. I still overall had a good time with it and enjoyed it for the reasons I've gone into and stated there. So that's my rather long review for BFG. I hope it wasn't too long and meandering. 8 out of 10. I'd say it's a decent watch for me. I would get it on Blu-ray, but it's not an amazing film. And if it's something that you're not really into, it may be worth skipping, because for some people it's just not their cup of tea, you know. But if you're a fan of the book like I am, and if you really liked the book as a kid and it was something that you really grew up with like I did, I think it's definitely worth checking out. And if you're a fan of Spielberg's movies in general, it has to be checked out at the cinema, because he's such a visual storyteller that it's always worth seeing one of his movies at the cinema, with the great John Williams score and everything else as well. So if you're a fan of that kind of stuff, I think it's always worth just checking out his movies, because even his average ones are still worth a watch. So that's my review for BFG, finally finished. I will see you guys soon with another review. Stay tuned.